Hey, how's it going, guys? This is your boy Hazzed, and today we're going to be doing a Frost DK Twink guide for level 59 Frost, Blood, and Unholy. Now, why would you want to play one of these three classes for a 59 Twink? When it comes to Frost DKs, they put out some of the strongest consistent damage when it comes to single target DPS out of any of the Twinks. When it comes to Unholy DKs, I've got to say it is by far the most versatile Twink that you can actually play in the 59 bracket, and it can also put out some of the craziest AoE damage out of any of them. And when it comes to Blood DKs, they're fairly fun. You're capable of 3v1ing melee classes or 4v1ing melee classes in a lot of fights just based on the two-hander that you're going to be collecting and watching this guide. So let's go ahead and jump into what kind of gear you should be getting, because gear is very important after they got rid of the Legion stat template. So let's jump into this and do it.
It's who we are, it's what we do, we've come so far, and now we pay the price, so don't even cry. The world is breaking down, and I cannot leave the ground.
So yesterday I received a comment, somebody wondering how exactly would you twink a Death Knight since item level levels up with your character now. And the first thing you got to realize is item levels, just because it's the same item level as another item, doesn't mean that item's going to be better or worse than the other item. Now, there are cases where, let's say a level 57 item has 8 strength on it. Well, somewhere else you may find the same level 57 item with 10 strength on it. And same applies with some of the green drops that are out in the world that are like level 61 item level, will come with 1 or 2 extra strength on them, really buffing up your character. Now, that honestly doesn't sound like much, but it starts to add up, especially when you go into the Burning Crusade dungeons and you start looting a lot of these socket items. Now we'll go ahead and show you some of these socket items, or really all the socket items and where you can get them. For the most part, your socketed items like the Iron Blade gauntlets are going to drop from either Blood Furnace, BC Dungeon, or it's going to be dropping from Hellfire Ramparts. Now, as you can see, Hellfire Ramparts is going to drop the chest piece that I'm wearing that allows 3 red gem slots for 6 strength. Now, all the gear and all the sockets you're going to be receiving, you're going to want to be putting 6 strength gems in them, being that even at level 59, your character is going to thrive or get more of a damage buff from putting gem slots with just raw strength stats than going crit or haste. The other thing to keep in mind about these certain items is the majority of them have very low drop chances. So if you do want to farm them out, luckily you can play Blood as a DK and farm them out fairly easy and get fast queues in dungeons. But yeah, so the chest piece drops off of Hellfire Ramparts, the first boss. You got to socket that with 3 strength gems and then put the 9 or 10 stats on it to make it deal. Obviously, it's well over twice as strong as a regular 57 item level piece of gear would be. We also got items that you're going to have to get from here, like the Tenacious Defender, which obviously I'm wearing, and it adds 2 extra gem slots, literally doubling the original amount of strength that this item could currently have. And of course, we got the last slot, which is the Iron Soul Clompers, which comes with another 2 socket bonus, and of course you're going to put 6 strength in each of those sockets, and of course you're going to put minor run speed and stamina increase on those boots to make yourself run faster, to keep up with other players, or to kite out other players as Unholy to deal a lot more damage, and of course get away from with a little bit of extra stamina. So now that we've gotten past the importance of collecting socketed gear, you've got all your socketed gear, you threw gems into it, you got your enchant on those items, the next thing that you're going to need to do is level up engineering. Not just any engineering, you are going to have to level up Northrend engineering, which at level 59 or 58 on a Death Knight, you can basically just fly to Old Dalaran from the ship. Very easy, very simple to get there. Learn your Outland engineering and then level that up. And the reason being you want to level that up obviously is because of the goggles that I'm showing. You notice the item level of these goggles are item level 100. These are going to be a lot stronger than any helmet you're going to find out in the world in a dungeon for level 59. So you're going to want to put that on. It is quite a big buff. to your character overall. The other reason you're going to want to be taking Outland Engineering is so you can get your belt enchants. Obviously, the belt enchant I'm using right now increases my speed, so I can run and catch up to people. Someone's kiting me, I can just, fly up on their butt and beat on them. Very easy to do, great for all three specs, obviously. And the other enchant you're going to get for this is really great for running dungeons, and it's fairly good for PvP in case you don't want to run as much, you don't want the mobility. You can take the frag grenade, which does about 600-700 damage, which is quite a strong hit coming from a Twink, since we do have a fairly large amount of crit. So now that we've got socketed gear taken care of, we've got enchants on those gears taken care of, we've got the engineering part taken care of, now we'll get to somewhat of the rest of the gear, since it's not necessarily as important, but it definitely is trying to get the right things. So for the most part, you just want to collect gear that has a very large amount of strength, not necessarily off stats, kind of like we were talking about with the gems to begin with, kind of like rings. Now these rings are from literally the Death Knight vendor inside of our class hall. All you got to do is use your death gate, go back there, buy these 2 rings, put them on. They have an insane amount of strength for this item level. So go ahead and toss those on, fairly simple. As for the neck, you could be using the Blade of Ebon Amulet, which again is very strong for this item level. You can throw on the enchant Mark of Hidden Satyr, which hits for about 200 to 300 damage, which is fairly strong for that level. If it crits, it'll hit for 600-700 damage, which is really strong for this level bracket. And that makes your neck piece a lot stronger than obviously the normal DK would have. As for other pieces, kind of like the shoulders here, you'll just throw on the heirloom shoulders, but what you'll do is throw on obviously the shoulder enchant on it to increase your strength by 7. I don't believe there's any socketed or good shoulders out in the world, so that's the reason why you just kind of stick with the heirloom shoulders here. As for the cloak, I believe there are better cloaks you can get in this, but the one I'm using is just from the Death Knight class hall, and all I did was throw an extra 4 strength on it to increase the strength by quite a bit, and it does have a fairly strong baseline amount of strength for that level as it is. As for bracers, plated Serenite bracers, I think these are from the class hall too, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not 100% sure on these right now, but basically you just throw an enchanted 8 strength on them, literally doubling the amount of power that these bracers would have, of course, for the current DK, or just a normal level 59 DK. And coming down to trinkets. Now trinkets can be kind of important, but not important at the same exact. I'd say they're definitely important now that I'm thinking about it. But anyways, for doing our engineering, another reason why we leveled our engineering is for the sonic booster. Now this thing is fairly strong, really good for twinking. It's level 95, really high item level like the helmet was, which gives you 31 stamina, fairly good buff to your health pool, but I mean not necessarily game breaking or game changing. But the 84 attack power you increase when using this item is pretty dang strong. Now could you change that out for something else? You definitely could, but this is kind of like I'd say is definitely a really strong trinket. Now when it comes to your second trinket, when it comes to Unholy Frost and Blood, it may change a little bit. Now this trinket I like to use with my Unholy spec a lot more than my Frost spec, because now this is a very, very strong Twink item, is Ramstein's Lightning Bolts. Now it's one you always see Twinks using. You click the button, it hits for like 1500 damage, or it crits for like 2000 plus. Like it's a really strong trinket overall, but it's gonna give you a large gap in between dealing DPS to a target, obviously since it's on a 3-minute cooldown. So let's say as a class as Unholy that has a lot of dot cleave and you're not necessarily relying on one set of burst, more AoE pressure, you'll go ahead and switch that out for, let's say, Recruit's Badge of the Fire Flash, which is something you got to get from winning Battlegrounds. It's actually pretty strong since it gives you an increased baseline of 15 strength, which a lot of other trinkets at this level, as you can see from Sonic Booster, that you're not going to find trinkets like that too often for this class. So it ends up being very powerful. Now if you want to run around and cheese and one-shot people, obviously Ramstein's Lightning Bolt's going to be the best combination, because you could actually chain that together with let's say a certain weapon proc and essentially make it a 2-shot as Unholy and Blood. But going over some of the weapons weapons. Now, weapons are extremely important when it comes to a 59 Twink. You gotta have the correct weapons. As for a Frost DK, you want to collect Wraith Scythe. Now, this drops from, I believe, was it Blackrock Depths? Let's go ahead and bring it up here in Classic. We're gonna Blackrock Depths going down, and I believe this drops off of the 7. And for some reason, it's not popping up there, which makes no sense at all. I must have, the wrong gear filter right there. Wraith Scythe. You can go ahead and farm that out, obviously, as blood, since you can queue for level 15 all the way up to level 59 dungeons on a Twink. So if you've collected a lot of these Twink items on a blood DK, and then you go in here and try to trash this dungeon collecting up this frost weapon, it's going to be actually really fast in comparison to doing it any other way, since you can basically portal right to the boss right before the boss that you want. It's pretty nice. But anyways, the reason this weapon is so effective is because of the effect. It hits for 278 damage, drains life from the target. Now, I don't know about you, but I want a little bit more survivability on my Frost DK, right? And now the other thing about these weapons, about enchants, it's kind of important. Do not put Fallen Crusader on your weapons, because it is nowhere near as strong as the proc you're going to get from Crusader that adds 100 strength. It's nowhere going to be as effective. Literally, for Rune of the Fallen Crusader to be as effective as Crusader, you would have to have about 800 to 900 strength baseline, which you have half of that. So Crusader is going to be a lot stronger. And as for... oh, wow, I can't believe I'm blanking on this right now. As for Icy... as for Razor Ice, as for Razor Ice, it will give you a little bit more consistency damage when it comes to your frost damage, but overall, again, the same concept. You're not dealing enough frost damage on this character for it to be a big enough effect. An extra 100 strength from Crusader on both weapons, which these items or procs do stack, which is going to increase your damage by a third, is a lot more effective than those two enchants by far. Okay, so we did that with Frost. You talked about them Frost weapons that are OP. The proc on the weapon is really what kind of sets Frost DKs up for dealing a lot of damage. They also can crit, so that 278 damage can actually hit for like 500. Both of those crits, you're looking at like a 1,000 extra damage. And being that as a Twink, I've only got, what, like 6k health? That's a lot of extra damage coming out of a level 59. So talking about two-handers, this is where it gets fun. I was talking about an OP two-hander on my last video. Doesn't matter if you're playing Unholy, doesn't matter if you're playing Blood. This is the two-handed Twink weapon for just about any Twink, Ret Paladins, Fury Warriors, anything of that subject. This is the way to go. All right, what is this called? Solthraz the Lasher. Now, the reason this weapon alone is so powerful is because of the effect down at the bottom. Now, this effect just blows my mind that it's in a level 59 category, but your melee attacks have a chance to lash the enemy with a range of Solthuz, lowering the target's damage by 263. So it nerfs them down a little bit, makes them deal less damage to you, which really, I mean, it's effective, but I mean, I'm not gonna, I'm okay, whatever. But the next part is what really makes this item insane. Dealing 866 shadow damage. 866. That can crit also, just like the one-handed weapons can, literally hitting a target for 16 to 1800 just right off the bat with that weapon. Bam! And literally this ability can proc off of any melee attack. So when it comes to Unholy, we'll talk about this a little more later, you can literally proc this sword off of clawing shadows at range. So you can literally be 30 yards away from somebody and hit them with a 2k hit. Like, you could be kiting him, spamming icy chains, whack him with a 2k hit. Like, it's so powerful, it's actually kind of insane to see it within this bracket. And the same thing goes for Blood. You're tanky, you're healing up, you get this weapon proc on the target, it hits them for, 16 to 1800, and it literally drops their health down to nowhere. And then, of course, it ticks them for an extra 860 damage over 15 seconds. So not only does it hit for 1/3 of somebody's life, but it's also going to take away an extra 1/5 off because of the dot. So extremely powerful weapon to get. Definitely key when it comes to both Blood and Unholy. If you don't have this weapon, you are really going to feel it if you do fight a DK with this weapon. And obviously, where do you get this overpowered weapon? Actually, it's kind of interesting where you got to pick this up. This is another item you got to pick up from Classic Dungeons. You go ahead and go down to Zul'Farrak. Now, what you got to do is pick up Jang, the sword, and you have to combine it with Sang. And once those two items are combined, you got to do it at the altar at the end boss. It's like a little thing sticking out from the wall. I literally just stood on it. And what you do is you right click the swords, they combine it, and it literally creates the two-hander Soul Thrash the Lasher. So you got to kind of go collect up multiple items, put them together to, obviously make this overpowered Twink item. Going over the talents that you'll want to be using for these specs, right now we'll start off with Frost. Now there's two you can choose from this that you'll want to be using. Either Inexorable Assault to increase the burst damage on your Obliterate. That's if you're trying to compile the largest amount of burst damage with your hardest hitting ability, that'll be the way to go. Or if you want to increase your overall consistency and increase the amount of procs that your weapons are dealing, which also in turn increases your overall damage, Icy Talons is going to be the way to go. But keep in mind, this will also lower your piled up burst, but it will increase your overall damage. So you got to kind of choose between the two right there. Which one's stronger in my opinion? They're both actually really strong. I think Icy Talons in overall, as long as you have like a healer on your team and you're doing team fights, Icy Talons is going to be stronger. If you're 1v1ing people and trying to duel or something like that, Inexorable Assault's going to be the way to go. As for level 57 talents, we're going to be running Runic Attune. Obviously that doesn't change. You could be running Horde of Winter for a little bit of extra upfront Obliterate burst, or you could be using that to time literally your Obliterate crits to apply maximum amount of pressure, maximum amount of burst on that target. But personally, Runic Attune, in my opinion, is going to be the best for overall damage, especially when combined with Icy Talons. As for the level 58 talents, you're going to want to be using Asphyxiate. I've been seeing a lot of DKs using Blinding Sleet, and I really don't know why. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me at 59, but hey, yeah, go with Asphyxiate, guys, trust me. As for PvP talents, obviously you're going to be using Gladiator's Medallion, because at that level, if you get stunned or something by a Twink, you need to get out of it and mitigate damage. Like, you can't sit a stun from a geared Twink and survive. It's not going to happen. As for PvP talents, you're going to want to be using Overpowered Rune Weapon to deal a lot of single target consistent damage at this level. The one thing you got to remember is you literally have like no haste at level 59, no haste at all. And when you proc Empowered Rune Weapon, it puts you up to 16% haste, which is a very large amount of haste for somebody at this level, which is how you generate a lot of your single target burst to kill the target and single target pressure for over time. It can also give you a little bit of extra healing for survivability and things along those lines, which I'm pretty mad that they're taking this out in 8.1. I don't know what the reasoning behind that is, but we'll have to go ahead and see. Another thing I want to talk about is, believe it or not, at 59, I believe in the future it may be viable to actually play a two-handed Frost spec at level 59, just for the fact that you could spam Obliterates and use that OP two-handed proc weapon. And instead of using Frost Strikes, use Death Strikes to consume Rune Power. It will give you a little bit more survivability. And for the majority of the time, you're going to be taking Icy Talons with the two-hander to increase your melee attack speed, increase the proc on that weapon, and deal quite a bit of damage while doing a bit of self-survivability. So I'm actually pretty excited for 8.1 to see if 59 Twinks are going to be viable with two-handers, because as of right now, it does a little bit less DPS than the one-handers with that build, but I'm thinking with the runic power reduction, that may not be it, and we'll actually be able to use two-handers as a viable spec at 59 Twinking. Talking about Unholy spec Twink talents, we're going to be starting off with level 56. I like to use Clawing Shadows because it's going to give you a huge mechanical advantage over fighting like Fury Warrior Twinks or fighting any kind of ranged class in the game, because all you have to do is literally hit a class at range with Clawing Shadows to get your OP weapon proc on the target at range, and most classes just can't deal with that kind of proc damage very well, especially if that crits, and since you're a Twink, your chance to crit is fairly high. You could also go with Infected Claws to increase your damage by a little bit because it will put bursting on the target. So you could do that if you wanted to be up in people's faces, but most of the time I found it to be a lot safer to run Clawing Shadows at level 59, considering how high a lot of the damage from the other Twinks really is. And really popping out from behind corners, hitting Clawing Shadows, spamming chains and LOSing and doing it over and over again is quite powerful at level 59. As for the level 57 talents, if you're running Infected Claws, you could run a Bursting Swords build, but in my opinion, it's not going to be nowhere near as strong as running like an Ebon Fever, combined with a PvP talent Unholy Mutation, to cause our Virulent Plague to erupt for 400% of the normal damage. Literally, these two abilities will be your top damage by far as Unholy. Your melee should be quite close as long as you're getting in on targets and trying to apply dots, but for the most part, your dots are extremely overpowered in the level 59 bracket. And it's what you're going to be using to deal, 200k to 300k plus damage in a level 59 Twink battleground. Now, as for Frost, is Unholy better than Frost? Yeah, Unholy is quite a bit stronger than Frost. Usually when it comes to Frost versus Unholy, Unholy loses in the single target consistent category, but because of this weapon proc and how strong it really is, Unholy has both insane AoE pressure and insane single target burst. And of course, for the level 58 item, we've got Asphyxiate. The other two don't even look over there. You don't even need to look. Actually, Grip of the Dead might actually be fairly strong for survivability now that I'm thinking about it, but I'm always going to take Asphyxiate over that. You got to take Asphyxiate over that. Last spec we need to go over, obviously, is Blood DKs. Now, Blood DKs are like the gods of 59 1v1. They are extremely powerful, and of course, the AoE pressure that they can deal literally is in comparison to Unholy and Frost. Now, in my mind, a Blood DK is kind of like the ultimate Twink out of just about any class in the 59 bracket, just because of the simple fact that you can have insane amount of self-survivability, an insane amount of healing, and of course, you can use the OP two-hander that lands the proc of Doom off of just about any of your abilities. So the talents that we're going to be using here is Blood Drinker, which obviously it does 1100 damage, and it's also going to heal you for quite a bit of health. And if anything's kiting you out, you just throw that on the target, hits for about 1000 damage. You might get a weapon proc off of it, and quite literally the combined damage is going to take off over 50% of somebody's health. As for the level 57 talent, you're going to be using Homeostasis to increase the amount of damage and healing you're going to do with your Death Strikes. Your Death Strikes are very important as they can literally hit or crit for about 1000 damage with this build and this two-handed weapon. As for the level 58 talents, we're going to be using Ossuary, which while you have at least 5 bone shields, it decreases the cost of your Death Strike by 5, which is really the important part of it. The additional runic power increased by 10 is not necessarily important, but the reduced cost of Death Strike is going to be important to deal a lot more damage a lot faster on a Blood DK. As for the PvP talents, you could change these up quite a bit. Gladiator's Medallion, obviously you don't want to change that, but as for other abilities, I have seen things like Blood for AoE kind of clumped up fights would be very strong. Last Dance would be very strong for increasing your AoE pressure and single target pressure and reducing the cooldown on your Dancing Rune weapon is very powerful, and also will add a little bit more defensive. Now, in my opinion, the best one to choose by far is Death Chains, and the reason being for Blood is you really, when you're playing Blood, you want to take on other DPS. You want a 1v3, you want a 1v4, and Death Chain basically takes all three of those targets when they're near each other, deals a little bit of a dot damage, and causing 20% of all damage to be taken to also be received by the others, and it lasts for 10 seconds. When you use this ability, you throw up Dancing Rune Weapon, which throws out triple dots on each target. When those dots start taking damage, it starts spreading 20% of it to each target, which is absolutely powerful. And of course, if they're all three DPSing on you, you drop Death and Decay, you start smashing Heart Strike with hits all three targets, you start hitting Blood Boil, which literally Blood Boil is extremely powerful for Blood also when it comes to the AoE category. You start dealing just a ridiculous amount of burst damage to these targets. Now you add up that dot damage, you add up the AoE pressure, and then you add in, let's say, Ramstein's Lightning Bolt, which hits for each target, it hits for, like 2000. It hits for 1600 to 2000. Now let's say each of those targets are taking 20% extra damage from those lightning bolts. So each lightning bolt essentially is going to hit for 2.5k to 2.6k, taking off again about 70% of all three of those targets' health instantly in Death Chains, proccing off the Ramstein's lightning bolt. You add in the dot damage, like quite literally a Blood DK at a 59 Twink can drop 3 people like that, like just dead. Like you could put them down just about faster than any class I've ever seen when it comes to fighting multiple targets as the 59 Twink. So now you kind of got your reasons to play each class, you know, why each one of them's overpowered and how each one of them's overpowered. Let's go ahead and start talking about rotation for each of these specs. When it comes to Frost DK Twink rotation, it's fairly simple. All you have to do is either open pop if it's DPS versus DPS Pillar of Frost, or if you're trying to time a kill, use it at the correct times with Empowered Rune Weapon to maximize the amount of strength you get, obviously from consuming runes. Now, what you want to do with this spec to deal probably close to the maximized damage, you're going to want to throw up Pillar of Frost up front and just start dropping obliterates. There's a reason Remorseless Winter's so far from my bar, because it really doesn't do anywhere near the amount of damage you're going to benefit from using just literal obliterations with this build. And also, since I'm not using Razor Ice on either of my weapons, it's going to make it even deal less damage. Now, dot damage is going to be extremely effective for Frost when it comes to AoE DPS and making yourself look good on the damage charts. So what you're going to want to do with this spec is, if it's DPS versus DPS, you're going to want to open pop Pillar. You're going to want to drop as many obliterates as possible, trying to get your weapon proc enchants, both Crusaders, and obviously as many drain life procs that you can get on the target as possible. That's where a lot of your melee damage and pressure is going to come from. Now, if you're fighting something that you need to execute and put down, popping Ramsteam's Lightning Bolt is definitely going to be very effective as an executioner. Or if you want to maximize AoE damage, let's say on 3 targets, you just run into the center of all 3 targets, use the Lightning Bolt so it actually hits all of the targets instead of just the one. But very simple. You throw up Pillar and you start spamming Obliterate on the target. You just spam the living crud out of Obliterate and try to deal as much pressure as you can. Now, a normal DK at this level, or a Frost DK at this level, is I'd say it's going to deal about 200 to 300 DPS, which, as you can see on this Twink, I'm dealing about 700 DPS, which is literally well over twice as strong as a regular Frost DK at this level would be. Now, I could cheese it a little bit and throw out my Lightning Bolt and push up DPS quite a bit more. You could actually hit with that Lightning Bolt. See right there, we got a 556 crit with one of our one-handed weapons there, siphoning life from them. Very effective. And right there you can see our Mark Enchant hitting for an extra 500. You can see our Obliterates critting for about 600. Generally my Obliterates can get up to about 800 damage, which is fairly strong for that kind of bracket when I'm popping all of my main cooldowns. And of course I get Crusader enchants, they can get fairly high. So pretty much spam Obliterates, use any Howling Blast procs you get, use Frost Strikes outside of it. Fairly simple. So when it comes to dealing DPS as an Unholy Twink, it's fairly simple, kind of like Frost. I mean, quite literally Twinking, rotation, I mean, it's all pretty simple even at level 120 to tell you the truth. But anyways, so on this training dummy, we're going to deal quite a bit of DPS to it. We're going to start off with an Outbreak. We're going to go in on the target, and we're just going to cast off some Festering Strikes. Now, your main goal with playing Unholy just about as any class is to just get off as many melee attacks as possible so you can get that OP weapon enchant proc off on the target, and of course get Crusader to increase your DPS by quite a bit. Now, that's kind of the single target based. You apply, again, your Festering Wounds, and then you smack your face on Clawing Shadows. Now, let's say you are fighting another Twink that's really strong, a Fury Warrior, something along those lines. All you're really going to have to do, again, is throw out Icy Chains, cut back, and of course cast your Clawing Shadows at range. Now, you don't even have to have your boils on the target to deal insane range pressure as an Unholy DK, because again, your procs, your dots, and of course your pet's going to be dealing a lot of damage at range with this spec, causing it to be very effective even when having to play defensive, or if your team's getting killed very fast. The other thing you're going to want to do in AoE when you're AoEing on a DK is obviously spread your dots as much as possible and go back on your first target. Now, if you could get, like, let's say all 3 of these targets to clump up, you'd drop your D&D, and then you'd start using your Clawing Shadows, so it would cleave each of the targets within the D&D effect. Now, when it comes to using Ramstein's Lightning Bolt, it's literally the same thing. You're going to want to apply your dots to every single target in the vicinity, run in the middle of them, use your Lightning Bolt, and then zap the crap out of the targets to deal just massive, I mean massive AoE damage inside of team fights. And last but not least, we're talking about the blood rotation, because it's kind of odd to say, but I think blood out of each of the 3 specs has the hardest rotation at level 59, just because there are things you need to change based on what kind of damage or what kind of things you're facing inside PvP. So going up to the target, we've got obviously our Blood Boil, we've got our Morrowind, we've got Heart Strike. Now, when we want to apply damage to any targets, you're going to want to open up first with Blood Boil. You want to apply your dots to the target to obviously start off ticking on the target. Now, the next thing you're going to want to hit is your Morrowinds. Now, obviously, when you're above 5 of those, it'll reduce the amount, the cost of your Death Strikes to hit them, of course, with the big attack ability. Now, you want to use your Death Strikes not whenever possible, but you always want to follow up your Death Strikes directly after your Blood Boils, because with your Blood Boils, again, increase how much damage your Death Strikes are going to deal within any kind of PvP combat. Now, let's say you were running into an army of players, and you just want to deal the maximum amount of damage you can on a Blood DK and just kind of blow up the targets. Now, obviously, you're going to proc Dancing Rune Weapon. You are going to use Death Chains, and you're going to start hitting Blood Boil right off the bat. Like, it's going to deal so much AoE pressure because, yes, your Dancing Rune Weapon does use Blood Boil. Alright, so what we're going to do, again, throw up Dancing Rune Weapon, chains all the targets together, and we're going to start casting off some big Blood Boils right away. And then we're going to go into melee targets, just like that little rotation I talked to you about, casting Morrowind on the target and then dropping those big Death Strikes. We just thought another 1000 Death Strike crit there, and did quite a bit of DPS. Now, the other things you could do, obviously, is throw out that AoE Death Chains and then use Blood Drinker on the target to apply a lot of AoE pressure too. But it's best to use the abilities when you have those targets chained together that are also going to cleave, so it jumps between all the targets that you're hitting instead of just the single target. Now, obviously, the big Wombo combo we'll be able to use here in about 5 seconds with the Ramstein's Lightning Bolt. And we'll go ahead and use that with the chains, because I'm kind of curious to see what it'll do anyways. So we'll go ahead and throw out our chains right here on the target, and we'll use the Lightning Bolt, which is going to cleave damage back and forth. It looks like it missed both the other 2 targets, but that's okay. I mean, obviously, we see what's going on here, and right there, the two-handed proc for 1,700 damage. Can you imagine critting somebody for 1,000 Death Strike crit, and then hitting them for 1.7k off the weapon proc? Like, that's insane damage coming from a tank. From a tank. Think about that. Extremely powerful. But anyways, guys, that's going to sum up this guide video for both Frost, Unholy, and Blood. If you want to make up a Twink for those, just follow this simple little guide, and you will be destroying just about everyone in those Twink battlegrounds. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave a like, comment down below if you have any questions about Frost DK, Blood DK, or Unholy DK Twinks. And of course, until next time, this was your boy Hazzed.